Larson. I'm Dan Ashley. Bye for the moment. We'll take you back. City streets of Oakland. No longer blocking 880. The freeway seems to be moving again. But there have been very few problems other than inconvenience to motorists. There's been, to our knowledge, no vandalism, no storefronts shattered, no real clashes with police. But of course, at some that is when police will typically tend to move in and begin to try to control the area or control intersections. And they'll want at some point to begin to disperse this crowd. And that's when, as we saw in San Jose and as we've seen many, many times over the years, that's when things often escalate.
Well, this group of protesters, we did see some lines of police officers in tactical gear near the freeway before the group went onto the on-ramp and onto 880. But we haven't seen any confrontations like we did in San Jose. And we
protesters in San Jose today with damage to the windshield and some painting of the cars and that kind of thing, or the rear window, as you can see here. As you look live now, you can see protesters have moved a dumpster and something else into the street. And this is where things get a little unnerving, because this is when showdowns tend to happen and a clash and test of wills as protesters are stopped by police and they want to find some place to go, and police want to move them in the direction that they want to move them and begin to try to disperse them. And the way they do that is to push them forward or push them in one direction or another and keep pushing them in one direction or another until the crowd begins to thin out.
Well, and Dan, about an hour ago, when it was a little lighter and Sky 7 was sort of perusing the area, we saw this blue, it looks like the cab of a truck in the middle of this intersection. So police have actually been staged here in this intersection for quite some time, at least an hour. This is 7th and Broadway, right outside OPD, right outside their headquarters, which is presumably why, one, police have gathered there, and two, why the protesters have gathered there.
Of course, yeah, making their point in front of the police station after what happened in Minneapolis involving the Minneapolis Police Department. Huge police presence, but as you can see, far outnumbered by the number of protesters. There are hundreds and hundreds of protesters there in front of the police station in downtown Oakland. Interim police chief Susan Mannheimer just took the job just a few weeks ago. From having retired in San Mateo, said today, certainly sympathetic with protesters and certainly upset by what she saw happen to George Floyd in Minneapolis. You see what looks like a flashbang grenade. Said today, you know, they're going to tolerate people's right to protest and free speech, but what will not be tolerated is destruction of property or injury to people.
Well, and Eric Thomas was reporting on this much earlier in the day, but it's a little bit ironic in that we were starting to reopen a little bit. So businesses in downtown Oakland were starting to reopen, hoping to see some more business, and had to very quickly shut down and even board up in many cases because they knew this protest was coming at 8 o'clock. And right now, Dan, we're looking, I'm seeing some smoke. Obviously, we can't hear because our visuals are coming from Sky 7, but have to wonder sort of what's going on down there on the ground. We see, as you say, a very large group of protesters gathered on two sides of 7th Street near OPD headquarters right now as police try and hold that intersection firm.
Yeah, you can see a couple of people throwing what look like sort of homemade smoke grenades or things on fire. Looks like very homemade sort of amateur stuff. And as we saw in San Jose today, this is where police will draw the line. They're not going to let them assault them. They're not going to let them throw things at them. Sergeant Ray Kelly is on the phone with the Oakland PD. Ray, are you there?
Yeah, Sergeant Kelly with Alameda County Sheriff.
Oh, Alameda County Sheriff. Kelly, thanks very much for coming on, Sergeant. What can you tell us about what's going on the streets of Oakland and the response?
Well, we are obviously responding to Oakland, and things have changed a little bit, the tempo, and we are doing a mutual aid assistance to Oakland. So we're calling in officers from throughout the Bay Area to assist with the situation in Oakland. So right now, the tempo is changed a little bit. We're going to go out there to make sure that we can try to keep things peaceful and as civil as possible.
It's Sergeant Kelly, thanks for joining us. This is Kate Larson. We saw OPD out about an hour ago on the streets of downtown Oakland. We saw the CHP, of course, doing what they could to keep the protesters off the freeway. Of course, the protesters were on 880, blocking both lanes for about 20 minutes. When did Alameda County Sheriff's Department get involved, and where are your deputies right now, and what's sort of your hope when it comes to providing aid to OPD in this situation?
Well, we've been obviously talking to Oakland for the last few days, and we've been working with them. We are the mutual aid coordinator for Bay Area law enforcement, so we do this quite a bit over the last several years. So we coordinate, but we have a mobile field force of officers out in Oakland now, and we'll be, depending on how the tempo goes, we're ready to bring in more officers as needed.
How many officers, Sergeant, how many officers roughly are available in a situation like this?
You know, it all depends, but we've been obviously seeing what's been going on across the country over the last several days, and so a lot of agencies have held staff over. So most agencies will be willing to give us at least half of their workforce in a situation, depending on how difficult it gets.
So you can bring quite a few officers to bear. I mean, you can bring a significant number of people.
You can, but when you have multiple locations as well, each county can drain their resources rather quickly. So you have to be smart about how you deploy your resources. And so this is a minute-by-minute situation, and you keep your eye on it, and hopefully you don't have to do that.
Well, and Sergeant Kelly, you said the tempo has changed, and we've seen a little bit of that play out. But what do you mean by that? What have you heard from your perspective in terms of the crowd's mood or their position?
You know, a lot of what we learn sometimes, well, we obviously have a lot of different ways we learn information, but a lot of it is the same information that you see, that what we see on social media, what we see down on the ground as well, and what we read about and see in the media, especially social media. So, you know, you can tell kind of the tempo, and you can see a change in the crowd oftentimes in situations where you'll see the protesters that came out with children and families, they tend to leave, and then a different element comes in, you know, an element that we've seen over the years that oftentimes comes with backpacks and masks and other things coming to do badness in the community. So when you start to see those things, you know the tempo is changing.
Yeah, I've seen that too. You know, you can sometimes sense that the atmosphere has changed. Let me ask you this question. Sergeant, being a police officer is never an easy job, and you're seeing some homemade some fireworks being thrown at police. Being a police officer is never an easy job. Becomes much more difficult, doesn't it, after an incident like we saw in Minneapolis? Talk a little bit about the challenges that something like that create for law enforcement everywhere.
Well, you know, what happened in Minneapolis is heartbreaking, and what's unfortunate about law enforcement and our profession is that one incident anywhere in the country has this gigantic ripple effect, and it doesn't matter what patch you have on your arm or what city you're from. It's the fact that you wear a badge that you represent. In this case, something horrendous that happened to a member of the community. So that sometimes is difficult when you know in your community that you're doing a good job, that you're giving your all, and then your profession as a whole gets labeled for the act of one bad person that does something outrageous. And so all of our officers, many of us who have dedicated our entire lives to community service, these hurt. It definitely hurts, and you feel like you have to start over and rebuild that public trust every time something like this happens. And we make tremendous strides in law enforcement to be transparent, to be community engaged, and investing in our communities. And so when these things happen, it actually actually really hurts your heart in a way that is hard to explain unless you've done this job and cared for your community and been there for your community. And so it's very frustrating for a lot of us in this profession.
Thank you for sharing that. Very candid, very powerful words, Sergeant. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sergeant Kelly, for all the great work that you and everyone at the Alameda County Sheriff's Office does. Just so you know, what we were seeing just here moments ago in front of Oakland PD headquarters is we saw large crowds gathered on two streets, blocked by a line of officers in tactical gear. We saw some fireworks thrown into the center of the intersection, and then moments ago it looked like somebody was hurt. Whether it was a police officer or a civilian, it's unclear, but there was a group of officers that dragged someone to the intersection, and then the crowd very quickly dispersed. Sergeant Kelly, are you hearing it? I know you're on the phone with us, but are you hearing anything or learning anything about what's happening right now, sort of what we're looking at as the crowds disperse and the officers move down the street?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, this is a minute-to-minute situation, and what you're seeing is just one story of many that are going on simultaneously. So we try to adjust and observe as best we can, and then react to those unique situations. So all of the different officers out there are trained to respond in a way that is reasonable given the situation. So that's what they're doing, and so we'll see how the next few hours go. But it's definitely, you can tell as from earlier this evening, the tempo is changing a bit, and once the signs that fireworks and objects are now starting to be thrown, I think is a good indicator of that. So we will continue to do our job right now. And
okay. Well, stay safe.
Where it goes.
Stay safe, Sergeant. Thanks very much for coming on. We appreciate it, Sergeant Ray Kelly, Alameda County Sheriff's Office. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sergeant Kelly. Be safe.
Thank you.
You know, and Kate, Ray makes a great point. We've seen this in protests in Oakland and Berkeley and other cities many times over the years. When it gets later, you know, the people that showed up with their kids, or they came to protest and they go home. The later it gets, sometimes a different crowd stays on later into the evening.
And you're under the cover of darkness, so presumably you might, more can happen under the cover of darkness, and that's certainly what we've seen in protests in the past. And that was, again, these situations change so quickly. Just like everyone ran off the freeway, there were a group of several hundred people in front of OPD. There was a confrontation of some sort, and then all of a sudden, very quickly, the crowds dispersed and ran down the street away from OPD. You can see, well, here on this other block, they moved about halfway down the block, and they're gathered there again. We did see someone getting dragged by police, someone who got hurt. We couldn't tell if it was a civilian or a police officer, but police were trying to help someone right there on that street that you're looking at in downtown Oakland right now.
And on the right, we're looking at downtown San Jose, which was the scene of a very large protest that started about 2 o'clock and went until maybe, 7:30 or 8. There's still a few people on the street and police on the streets, but that situation seems to have calmed down considerably. But there's still a large police presence there, as you can see, officers standing in front of a handful of protesters that remain. That situation has quieted down considerably, but what's happened in Oakland has really intensified, and there are hundreds and hundreds, perhaps thousands of protesters on the streets of Oakland. There you see some folks.
And Dan, about San Jose, which is on the right side of your screen, we do know that San Jose Fire was called to 6th and Santa Clara about 9:15 tonight, so about 15-20 minutes ago, for a report of shots fired. We know 2 people were injured, but right now we don't know how they were injured. They weren't necessarily shot. They could have been injured in some other way. So we're working to get more information about that now. But clearly, since we, left San Jose about an hour and a half ago, we've been focused on Oakland since the protest started at 8 o'clock. Obviously, the situation has been evolving there. The protest has not ended. There's still activity going on in downtown San Jose.
Yeah, there's still absolutely there's still activity. It has calmed despite the incident that Kate has talked about and that we're following. It seems to have calmed a little bit, and the crowd has thinned out dramatically. But it is by no means over in San Jose either. But as you can see the different very different scenes on the left and right-hand side of your screen. Left being in Oakland, very, very active with thousands of protesters, perhaps that many, certainly hundreds and hundreds of protesters still on the streets and on the move.
Dan, it looks like someone's got their hands up here in Oakland on the left side of your screen. Again, it's getting dark, so it's hard for us to make out all the details. Yeah, it looked like he had his hands up. Something's going on as police move towards him right there.
He looks like he has got some things to say to the police, so he's yelling at them and now moving off in the other direction and being a